Imagine the scales of justice. Okay, here they are. And weighted down onto one side of the scales is all the stress you have in your life, okay? It's everything you're dealing with. You're dealing with ailing parents, or you're dealing with a mortgage, or you're dealing with a job you don't like, or whatever you're dealing with, okay? There it is, piled onto one side. You've got these young kids who need you. It's so demanding. We're all stressed to the max, okay? So a lot of times, what's going to give over here? A lot of times, nothing's going to give. We can't sell the house. We can't, our parents aren't going anywhere. We have to deal with them until they're gone. There are a lot of things that won't budge on this side of the scale. It's really, really weighing us down. The only thing we have the power to do a lot of times is to weigh down on the other side of the scale resources, things that balance out our life, balance out our experience of life. So we need to care about whether or not we're doing the things that make us feel good, that bring us pleasure, that bring us balance and calm and joy and peace and everything else. So we may think we're doing this great duty by putting ourselves last because we're taking care of everybody else. And in fact, that sometimes is the root of why our children aren't doing as well as we'd like to see them do in modulating their own emotions and arousal levels, okay? So we can't give them anything we don't possess. That's the bad news. If you don't possess it, how do you think they're going to get it? They have to get it through you. So you've got to really be paying attention to what you're doing for yourself. And as they see you regulate and modulate and how you're going about doing that. So what would be some of the ways? If you had your druthers, what would be some of the things that you would have in your life more now that you know would contribute to you in a positive way?
Go to the gym.
You go to the gym more. Sleep.
Yoga.
Right? What else would you do? Those are really important, all of
Go on
those.
a date.
You'd go on a date.
Have sex.
Have sex.
Oh my
Yes.
God, no.
Yes.
Said it.
Oh no.
Yes.
Yes.
Eat it.
Yeah, of course. You're not thinking about sex. Okay. So yes, you're absolutely right. First of all, okay, cortisol is a stress hormone, okay? It's the most powerful stress hormone. It builds up in you all day long. Now, if you're not traumatized, you don't wake up in an anxious state. You wake up rested. If you're waking up in an anxious state and it doesn't take anything to set you off, then you know there's something unresolved going on. Because our natural functioning, right, our body's natural functioning is that when we wake up, we're rested. Sleep is the single best way and most important way to bring cortisol levels down. This is the stress hormone that really interferes with our brain's capacity to think clearly, to make good decisions, to do it right the first time instead of having to go back and do it over and over and over again because, sometimes we can be careless when we're rushed or we're feeling impatient or we're just on edge, we're agitated, we're out of the zone of optimum arousal, okay? So if we're getting a good night's sleep, then we're waking up rested. And then, yes, the stress builds and we need to have a good night's sleep again. So those of you who aren't sleeping, that's a major, major deal because that's when you're more easily upset, you get more upset than you normally would, you stay upset longer, you can't really shake it off, right? You're unable to soothe yourself out of that. So yes, your sleep, going to the gym, exercise, my gosh, releasing all of those endorphins, right? That stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system. So everything we want to be doing and implementing resources is because we want to trigger, right, the parasympathetic that's going to bring us down. And those examples you gave are some of the best ways to do it. Yes, and
Can I
then yes.
acknowledge the elephant in the room?
Sure.
When you're talking about this stuff, I can say this because my sister's not here. She's in Canada. She does that. Well, first of all, she doesn't do that. She's 16 and 19-year-olds, so I'm seeing what's going on now. She does it with drugs,
Right.
with smoking,
Right.
with alcohol.
Yeah.
She's constantly highly elevated, and she has 2 kids who are smoking, drinking,
Yeah.
doing drugs, getting arrested now, her 16-year-old.
Yeah.
And she calls me going, what the fuck do I do? I'm like,
Yeah.
I can't even talk to you.
No.
Like, hello?
Well, because she's up here.
She's
It doesn't
a
even matter
parent
what
and
you would
she's
say
trying
to her.
what she can.
Yeah.
But everything she's constantly doing, I'm like, go to yoga.
Yeah.
Take a run, take the dog for a walk. She doesn't
Yeah.
want to hear any of that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not what we came to talk about, but how, I'm assuming that it's pretty obvious that any of those external false resources
Exactly.
do not have, it's a placebo.
Exactly.
Right?
It's a Band-Aid.
Right.
It's a quick fix. It goes away, and our nervous system is just as damaged as it was before we did that. When we're doing healthy resources, right, when we're implementing healthy resources, we're actually stimulating the healthy development, the readjustment back to a healthy level of the nervous system. So that is the most important thing to do. When that wears off, they're still back at square one. Yeah.
Okay, when you were talking about like getting out of the stream, and you used the word in this part of your presentation about over aroused.
Yes.
I mean, you weren't limited only to that. Did it also include like under aroused?
Yeah.
So okay, so I just wanted to be
Yeah,
clear about that.
yeah,
So,
when
'cause you didn't
you-
put the resource like on the bottom, but you meant to, right?
I mean it.
Okay, good.
Exactly.
Very good.
So the resource has to be implemented here. Well, and that brings up, I always run out of time. I don't get to share all of the information, but the truth is that even if you look under aroused, inside the nervous system is still really activated. You're still stuck on high. I want you to imagine a duck floating on a pond. And the duck looks really peaceful, right? But what is the duck doing underneath the water? Pedaling like hell. That's what the nervous system is doing. It's like this, okay, you're driving in the car. The sympathetic nervous system is the gas, right? I'm getting really excited, really aroused. The parasympathetic is the brake, right? It's supposed to calm that sympathetic nervous system back down, right? Well, the under-aroused pattern is actually when the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, the brake and the gas are both being pushed to the floor. That's what it means. So on the outside, see, I know I didn't want to confuse you guys, but okay, so the sympathetic, okay, here's the event that happens. It makes your sympathetic go up like this, and it stays stuck on high. Well, what does our body know? If we stay stuck on high, that actually to the brain equals death. And in fact, it does equal death, because if you live in that high state of arousal your whole life, you do decrease the longevity of your life. It takes like 5 to 10 years, depending on your life circumstances, off of your lifespan. Okay, so why? Because it's so taxing on all of your organs. When you're up here, your cortisol levels are pumping, right? You're just in a state of stress, high stress, obviously. And when you are, you're stressing, you're taxing all of your organs. So because the body and the brain knows that if you stay in this state for too long, it will equal death, the parasympathetic does what it was made to do. It does everything it can, everything it can to override the sympathetic. And in the case of under-aroused people who show that pattern, it does just win out over the sympathetic. But look at this, right? The sympathetic is still stuck on high. It's just that the parasympathetic did its job and suppressed all of that, okay? So, which is why, guys, that these are the people that 1 minute they're really under-aroused and, you know, they're not engaged and nothing's quite, and the next minute they can be like this. Right? You took my pencil. It was you. You're looking at me funny. And nobody can predict what it's going to be that sets these people off. It's like a hair trigger of an event. Many people say to me, he was fine, you know. He got home from the hospital because medical procedures are huge. They got home from the hospital and they were perfectly fine, you know. They seemed fine. He didn't even cry. A lot of times parents will remark, didn't even cry. Right? And months will go by, and then there'll be night terrors, and then nightmares, and then seeing, you know, thinking that they see, you know, the ghost on the ceiling or whatever, right? They start to, and that can happen months later. Because in fact, what happens, guys, is that they can go into a state of shock, which is like a freeze reaction. Remember I said the fight or flight response, right, is mediated by the reptilian brain? When children, and it's so true for our children, when they can't fight and they can't flee, like in medical procedures, okay? So they're taken into this pretty scary place, and there's people all around them, and there's, you know, tools, whatever you want to call all that paraphernalia, and they see it and they're there, and maybe you get to be with them and maybe you don't get to be with them. And they're terrified going in there, and they want to run. Their animal brain is in high gear and they want to get out. They'll be scanning their environment for the exit and wanting to be getting out of there, okay? But what in fact happens? They're restrained. So all that energy, that fight or flight energy, and understand, this is enough energy for a mother to take a car off of her baby, okay? That's how powerful we get because of these energies of fight or flight. That is pumping through our children when they are afraid, right? When they feel like they're in a life or death situation or they're being threatened in some way. So all of that energy is there, and then they're restrained, they're put out, right? And of course, as they go out, as they go down, as they go in to anesthesia, so shall they come out. Yes.
I'm sorry, just because my son had surgery when he was 5 weeks old.
Yes.
So how early?
I'm
could
glad
that
you're
kick in?
asking that. Your questions are awesome. And the bad news is that you can never be too young or too small to be traumatized, because what we know is our children don't have to have words. They don't have to be able to tell us that they've been changed, right? It's in the brain, it's in the nervous system. These changes are in the brain. Remember when I said, oh my goodness. Remember when I said the amygdala fails to stop turning off? Okay, there's that amygdala. That's actually called a kindling effect. And when our arousal is high, when we are stuck on high, okay, let's just call it that, right? Our sympathetic goes way up when we're afraid. And that amygdala starts sending that message of fear, okay? This is all done whether we're verbal or not. We have our brain stem long before we have any other part of our brain. So we can feel terror in the cells of our body before we ever are able to develop the words to talk about it, okay? So it does help us to understand that that's possible, but again, right, let me tell you the two factors that distinguish our children who become traumatized from those who don't, because many don't, okay? Our body is a self-healing mechanism. So the two factors that distinguish our children, one is previous experiences of trauma. So trauma, there's a cumulative effect of it on the nervous system. So that is an early experience that may or may not have had a lasting effect, right? One of the other big factors, the second factor, is the availability of resources before, during, and after the event. So if you were with your baby right up until the moment that they had surgery, no.
Took them away from us.
Yeah. If you can be in the room with your baby, if you're there when the baby wakes up, if you can scoop that baby up and be caring for it, immediately after, so that the baby is not alone, right? Because they don't have their parasympathetic, remember, until they're 3. So they're feeling all this fear and anxiety because they're perfectly capable of feeling that. They have their brainstem, they have their sympathetic nervous system, so they can feel all of that, right? But they can't bring themselves down. So unless there's somebody there to help soothe them, they do stay in this highly anxious state. And that's when the amygdala over time will stop, will fail to stop sending the message and will become kindled. The brain becomes kindled. What that means when they're stuck on high like that is that it takes less to upset them. They get more upset than most other kids in similar situations. They stay upset longer. They're harder to soothe, right? So they become they have more of an unregulated nervous system, and I guess they would become what we would call, for lack of a better term, a difficult child. Yes, in the over-aroused and under-aroused pattern, you need to be implementing resources because you need to be soothing the nervous system. So even though you want to get the person back up into the life stream, you're actually doing it by decreasing this sympathetic nervous system, and the only way to do that is to continue to implement, to trigger the parasympathetic, right, by implementing resources. So that part of it is a little confusing. It goes deep into the physiology of the brain. But so just know Okay, let's think about what resources are for your children.